Hello, welcome to this combined vlog and podcast series where I have the privilege to sit down and chat for a while with some of my colleagues, my peers in the field of media studies that I admire, that I'm a fan of. And today I'm sitting down with a rock star writing team. They've been working in our field for a long time and collaborating for over the last decade or so. And doing some amazing work in the field of, on the one hand, news use, and the other hand, media and everyday life kind of research. Pablo Boczkowski and Eugenia Mitchelstein. They're going to be talking about their careers, about their collaborations, and about a new book that is coming out with MIT Press called The Digital Environment. Pablo is a very dear old friend. He's Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern University in the United States, founder and director with Eugenia for the Center of Latinx Digital Media Studies, faculty director of the Master of Science in Leadership for Creative Enterprises program at Northwestern University. And also co-founder and co-director with Eugenia of the Center for the Study of Media and Society in Argentina, MESO. He was named Fellow of the International Communication Association recently. He was a Senior Fellow at the Weizsäcker Institute for the Network Society in Germany as well. He is a lot of award-winning books that are used throughout our field. His original Digitizing the News book, some amazing edited volumes that he put together, like Remaking the News, Trump and the Media, together with Zizi Papakarisi, who also was featured in one of these vlogs and podcasts. And at the moment, he has three new books coming out. A Manifesto for Journalism together with Barbie Zelizer, also featured in one of these interviews, and Chris Anderson, who is on my wish list, of course. Then a solo author book called Abundance that is about to come out, and with Eugenia, of course, The Digital Environment at MIT Press. Eugenia Mitchelstein is Associate Professor and Chair of the Social Sciences Department and Director of the Communication Degree at the University of San Andrés in Buenos Aires, Argentina. With Pablo, she earlier wrote The News Gap, When Information Preferences of the Media and the Public Diverge, which was published with MIT Press. Her research agenda focuses very much on the interaction between political communication, new media, and citizen participation. With Pablo, as well as Ignacio Siles, she studies the decline of printed newspapers in Buenos Aires, in Chicago, and Paris, and the implications thereof for democratic life. Her projects are all linked by an interest in an interdisciplinary research based on studies of communications, politics, and science and technology. And with Eugenia and Pablo, we had a lovely discussion scattered across 3 continents with intermittent Zoom connectivity issues about things that we all care very deeply about. It was a very personal discussion. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope to hear from all of you what you thought of it and how it perhaps informed your work. Enjoy. So great. Well, welcome, both of you. It's so good to see you. We're on 3 continents right now, in the US, Argentina, and here in the UK. And still we get to meet and hang out in Pablo's favorite coffee shop, which is very, very nice. Pablo, can you say 1 or 2 things about where you are right now, at least where your virtual background is?
I'm virtually at the corner of Scalabrini Ortiz, which is a major avenue in Buenos Aires and Paraguay. which is a significant, I mean, not as big of a street, but still, it would be technically Palermo, I believe, or Barrio Norte,
Yes.
one of those two neighborhoods. It's a
Palermo,
cafe. Palermo,
Mm.
okay. Cafe from 1950s, which is about 10,000 kilometers away from where I physically am. So it's an interesting juxtaposition. The name of the place is Varela Varelita.
And it's a sort of like a coffee shop or something like that?
Yeah,
Or?
it's your typical. There are thousands of these in Buenos Aires.
Right.
I used to live very close and I liked the area, and I figured I use that for a few weeks as my screensaver or my background.
Yeah, it's the what are these places called? The third space, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a third space. Yeah, that's where we find all the media professionals. Great. Well, lovely to see both of you. Evgenia, you're calling in from home, I presume, like I am.
Yes, I'm at home and at a tiny room I had never used before the pandemic. So this was a tiny room in my house. And when the pandemic started, I thought I'm gonna clear it out and I'm gonna use it as my office. So that worked out great.
Perfect. Well, it's lovely to see both of you, and we have so much to talk about. And what I would like to do first, before anything else, is to talk about the road you two have been traveling together, because I mean, for the last, well, at least 10 years, or if not more, you've been working together, first as student and professor, and now, of course, as two fully fledged full-time faculty members across different continents, sometimes on the same continent, doing research, publishing together on a wide variety of issues. Of course, now there's a new book coming out, your second book together, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it's an incredibly productive and beautiful relationship. I wonder if you could say something about how you two found each other, and what makes this relationship work. It sounds like a therapeutic counseling session, which it isn't. but I'm just asking because, you know, we live in an age of, you know, like meritocracy, individual achievement, and education. That's what we're constantly being evaluated against. And to see these kind of very productive partnerships that are also very warm friendships, sort of, you know, to be able to maintain over time, it's inspiring, it's beautiful, but it's unusual. And also because in the introduction of your new book, you actually talk about this a little bit, where you say, you know, that in part what shaped both of you was the way you came up through a specific period of history in Argentina, and later on, of course, in the United States. And so I wonder if you both could say a little bit about this trajectory that you've been on.
So I'm pretty sure that I knew about Pablo before he knew about me. So I'm gonna start.
Nice.
I was an assistant as a teaching assistant at the Universidad de San Andrés.
Mm-hmm.
With Hernán Galperín. And I'm like, oh, where can I apply? Oh, I have no idea. And he said, oh, you should apply to this, and this, but you should also apply to Northwestern. Pablo Boczkowski is working there, and you're gonna like working with him. So I did all my applications, you know, Penn, USC, I don't know, NYU, Northwestern, and I got accepted at several of these places. But before I could decide where I would go, Pablo wrote to me and said, I want to be in Buenos Aires, let's meet. And we met in La Biela, remember, Pablo? And I instantly thought, I can work with this guy. Like, I can work with this guy. This is going to be a productive arrangement. And that's how I met Pablo, and that's how I decided actually to do my postgraduate studies, my doctorate at Northwestern. So I knew about Pablo before he knew about me.
Mm.
So let me tell the other side of the story then. I remember, I think it was either this, probably was late December or early January. I was vacationing with my two very young children and the person who was then my spouse at a resort town in Uruguay. And I was taking a little bit of a break when the kids were napping. And I get an email from this colleague, Hernan Galperin, who at the time was at Universidad de San Andrés, as Eugenia said. Now he's at the University of Southern California. And Hernan and I had met in 1997 in the computer lab at Stanford in the comm department when we were both graduate students. We've been friends since. So he sends me an email and he says, I have a great teaching assistant, a research assistant that is applying for graduate school, and you need to convince her to go to Northwestern. And I remember I said to him, I'm on vacation. I was in my bathing suit, a lot of sunscreen lotion and all of that. And he immediately replied, he said, no, you don't understand. This is a once in a lifetime student. You have to convince her to go to Northwestern. So then I look at the file. We made her an offer, and as Eugenia said, next time I was in Buenos Aires, I met with Eugenia and with her husband Ruben. I remember Ruben was there too. If I'm
yes,
correct.
Yes, he came with me.
Yeah, because we were also talking about he going to law school at Northwestern. Eugenia's husband is an attorney in Argentina, and we talked, and I evidently convinced Eugenia to go to Northwestern, to come to Northwestern instead of going to Penn. And yes, I mean, one thing that was incredible about Eugenia is that everything he had done up until that point and since then is always done perfectly. So he, back in the day, I don't know the year, you probably do know, Eugenia, but there was a contest joint between the largest media conglomerate in Argentina and the BBC. They were looking for the best multimedia journalist of the country, and guess who won that contest, Mark?
You tell me.
So she ended up working at the BBC for about 6 months, and then she got a Chevening scholarship to study at the LSE. And then when she was a television producer, and when she went back to Buenos Aires, Google opened up offices as she was applying for graduate school and getting into Northwestern, Penn, this and that. She applied and she became one of the first employees at Google. But then she ended up coming to the US, etc. So when she came to Northwestern, it was like a revolution. I mean, in the sense that her productivity and her creativity was completely off the charts. And that was the beginning of how sort of we started working together.
And what role would you say did the political turmoil in Latin America around that time played in all of this? I mean, you, like I said, you reference it briefly in the book, but especially for readers who are not all that familiar with all the things that happened, but the political context plays a role in both your work, not just in that time, but throughout your work. I mean, there's various implications of this. I mean, of course, Pablo, your recent co-edited book on Trump and the media is a typical example of this, but political context is important. So could you say a little bit about that?
Euge, you want to go first?
Yes, I get the feeling when I talk with other people from Argentina or from Latin America in general, and with Pablo too, of course, is that we have a shared history. So we have a way of understanding what happens in politics. I'm not saying it's a better way. I'm just saying it's a particular way of understanding what's happening in politics. That's that we tend to understand things in a certain way, and also maybe to be a little, I would say, distrustful. I don't know if that's a word, but to be like aware of interests like that come, I'd say, behind what people say. Like it's, but also the awareness that censorship. I mean, I was born in '79, and there was a dictatorship in Argentina, and people were actually killed and disappeared. And I don't remember this, but I know it happened. And you couldn't say certain things, and certain things were forbidden. So the feeling I have is people not only from Argentina but from Chile too, and from Brazil too, and from Uruguay too, is that we value both the freedom and democracy in a different way, but we're also very aware of the dangers they are in. So this is I say what we have in common. I don't know if Pablo agrees with.
No, I think I agree with you. So I think a couple of things I would add. The first one is that one of the things that Eugenia has contributed to my thinking and my overall research trajectory is that I did not do work on politics and media until she started, she came to Northwestern and we started working together. Eugenia was trained in her undergraduate in political science, not in communication. And also she did a separate degree on journalism. But she thinks very much like a political scientist, even to this day, which I don't. So to me, it's been a great learning process and a great source of ideas.
I don't know if that's good. I don't know if that's good.
Well, well taken. But for me, I think that, and you can clearly see it in my research publications. So I owe to Eugenia, among other things, the fact that I now have something to say, or have contributed something at the intersection of sort of media and politics. The other thing that where I agree with Eugenia, but it's a bit different, and it has to do with age. She was born, you said 79, Euge, right? I was born in 65, so it's almost a generation earlier. And I only have one sibling who's 9 years older, okay? So between 8 and 9, they don't have. So so when the most recent and hopefully the last dictatorship came on board in 76, I was 11, my brother was 20. So many of his friends coming over, to hang out for one evening, or many, all of a sudden they would never come back. And some would have to exile, others would be disappeared, others would be killed. Just to put it in perspective, about a third of my brother's high school cohort was either killed, kidnapped, disappeared, or had to flee the country. We had to hide the books. I was forbidden from talking about many topics by my parents, and told that I would be putting them and the whole family in danger. I went to a high school when I was 13. Our high school starts in 8th grade in Argentina. That was part of a national university system. And because of that, because the military government was very distrustful of all the Marxists and all of those, in the university system, the military intervened at the high school. So I did not have a principal. I had a colonel of the army as my principal. And if I wanted to go to the restroom in the middle of class, not during recess, I was escorted by an armed preceptor who showed me, the back of his gun as I was doing my business, to make sure that I would not, put a bomb. And I was 13 years old when I started living like that. So like Eugenia said, I mean, Argentina and all throughout Latin America, the wave of democratization was extremely powerful and hopefully will last forever. But those of us who went through living without a democracy, know how valuable dissent, diversity, and all of that, and is, and how fragile it could be, and how much it needs to be preserved. So concretely, one of the ways in which I think, Eugenia, correct me if or add, feel free to add to it, but that it shapes our work, is that we try, it's not about having only one viewpoint. We try to do research, in particular to express our findings in writing that can have as much of a big umbrella or big tent where different opinions can be entertained, and you know, where everybody might feel the right to speak, so to speak. Right? Yeah.
Well, it's something that maybe I'm building a bridge that doesn't exist. So please, both of you, correct me if I'm wrong. But that there is something in both your work that speaks to this for me. I mean, like if we look at the work that you've done together, which I'm generalizing too much to do justice to the richness of it, but I mean, it focuses on the one hand how people use and make sense of the news and journalism in their lives, and the other hand, how people just navigate through the world using media in general. And when I read your work, what I consistently pick up, and I really appreciate what you were saying, Pablo, about this big tent that you've built that allows a lot of different voices in, is while you're doing that, there is a certain glee that you seem to be having, both of you, in sort of punching through all too easy explanations for things, especially those explanations that are considered mainstream or dominant in any specific field, particularly the field of media and communication studies. I mean, you often I mean, we've known each other also, especially Pablo. I mean, I think the first time I met you was at MIT. It's when you were still at MIT. And it was also immediately like I reached out and like, let's go for coffee. I do remember that. There's a pattern there, but it's really lovely. But sort of a joy in saying, well, I'm not really 100% part of this world, that wherever this world is, whether it's sociology of news or, you know, media consumption, sort of whatever it is, use and gratifications. But our data shows that that's not the entire picture that can or should be painted. So a love for debunking and never discrediting. You never say, well, that theory is wrong. You're just saying, well, there's also this other thing that we found empirical evidence for, and perhaps could make the tent even bigger. But that joy in debunking, is that also a little bit of, and I'm reaching, I know, but of that, as academics we can get over invested in our own theoretical concepts and models, and therefore the Germans make this beautiful point of saying we do Hineininterpretierung, like we interpret the data to fit into our way of thinking, and that's the joy that you find, is of distrusting that and poking holes in that. Does that make sense, or am I really missing the point here?
Eugenia, I'm looking at her. You wanna go first?
No, it makes sense, and I want to say something about Pablo as a professor, which is that's the way he teaches his students. That's the way he leads class. That's the way he says, like, okay, this could be true, but what about this? And what if this doesn't explain the whole story? Okay, about working with Pablo is that he owes ability. And that's something I appreciate a lot. And I think, like, I've seen him with other students, and I've seen him do it with like a large audience. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting about working with him. And that's one of the things I try to do as a professor now. Like, try to lead my students to think out in different ways. So this is like words so still be dogmatic. Like, this is the way it is, and I'm telling you this is the way it is, and you should always think of things this way because this is a theory. It could be Marxism, it could be functionalism, it could be psychoanalysis. But they always have, in general, but Pablo in particular, is this possibility of looking at things in different ways to make sense of the whole picture.
Well, thank you. What I think what I would add to that is there is a lot of benefit in being marginal. I think global north, because it's not just US. I've seen the same in Germany and the UK. those national academic cultures are all about being central. And when you are central, as you said, Mark, you are invested in a particular paradigm, and you need to put the paradigm in front of the data. And when you are absolutely marginal, and I mean, I teach at an elite US institution, but I still, the more time I spend outside of Argentina, the more Argentine I see myself. You know, Walter Benjamin said that a true intellectual sits at the margins. Not that I'm a true intellectual, but I mean, I do think there is some value in, you know, practicing scholarship through a position at the margins, and that is refreshing, and that is sort of allows you to renew yourself constantly. And the thing is that you know, theories tend to be self-reinforcing, but reality is completely unruly. I mean, not that there are no patterns, but reality surprises you much more than theory. Who would have thought that we would be having these conversations on a computer, right? And we would be living for 11 months, those of us who are academics, basically through computer, teaching, meeting, etc., etc. You know. So, so yes, there is some glee, as you said, but it's not that we set out, and perhaps Eugenia has a different view, but it's not that we set out to do that. One thing that is common to both of us is that we are empiricists first, and it is basically what we end up finding in one way or the other, in part perhaps because we are not wedded to a particular framework or a particular trajectory, that we are more open to that. So the other thing, and I think is important, at least in my experience, institutional academic cultures in the US, UK, Netherlands, Germany, etc., tend to favor depth over breadth, and tend to favor a lot of specialization. So if you are going to do that, then you need to do incremental changes over what you've been doing for a period of 30 or 40 years. There are some people for whom that works very well, but I mean, for me, it doesn't. And in less resourceful nations like Argentina, etc., where you're not going to hop jobs every 5 years, you're not going to have a competing offer that's going to raise your salary, or nothing will happen, then you just settle on your job and let your imagination roam, right? So I think the institutional environment fosters, that's what I've seen in the case of Eugenia's career. You know, Eugenia now is chair of the department, first female chair of her department in the university's history. So it's a very, very powerful position, but that has not prevented all of this creativity and, you know, all of this puncturing. As a matter of fact, perhaps it has been because of that, right? Which in the US context perhaps might not have been.
Yes, and something to add to that is that both, I'm going to speak out San Andrés, and I don't know if that's the case in Northwestern, but in my university, the book we are just publishing with Pablo on MIT Press is not a traditional, I would say, scholarly book. And maybe in another university they would have frowned upon that, and they would have said, oh, maybe you need to do some research, some single author book about your own research. And the feedback I get from my colleagues is, this is a book on the digital environment. This is great. This is just what we needed. So my feeling at the margins allows you a little bit more of, I don't know how to say it, but maybe a little bit more of freedom.
That's great, and I really appreciate the link to the new book, because let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, in many ways it's a unique book. Like you said, Eugenia, it's not your typical scholarly book with you know 5 references in every paragraph and tables and data. It's almost like in every chapter you focus on 1 or 2 key prominent academic texts and authors, and talk with them and unpack them, and then frame them in the context of broader debates and discussions. And it's still very accessible and very lively. It's like a real yeah, I would say a way of guiding us through the experience in a way all of us have been having in the world for the last 12 months, of truly living in a digital environment. What and of course we will talk a little bit more in detail about various issues in the book, but one thing that I was just wondering about what your take on is that this notion that our media aren't specific devices to us, they aren't particular channels, like, television separate from, the phone is separate from the computer, is separate from whatever, but that for the way we experience media, just people in general, there are no real distinctions, right? It's like all the devices, our practices, and how we make sense of it, they all interact in so many different ways that as scholars we are, it's inevitable that we would consider all of that as a whole, holistic, as you also say in the book. And as you make the point in the book as well, there have been ideas about this as far back as the 1960s or 50s, even, in a sort of an imagination of a media surround, of media, of calls in our field to look at media also empirically as an ensemble. Especially in recent decade or so, we see a proliferation of theories and concepts in our field that try to articulate this. The media manifold that Nick Coldry came up with, polymedia that Miller and Marianu worked with. If I may be so arrogant, I'll put my own media life concept in that list as well, that you very kindly reference in your book. But that these were all sort of attempts towards the same goal that I think you, for the first time, really unpack with clarity and consistency, and supported by empirical work. But apologize for the long introduction. Like, why has it taken our field so long to get here? Because it seems so obvious looking back that we aren't just newspaper readers or just TV watchers or just people on a phone. We're all of that interchangeably all the time. And we've always have been. It's just that now it's perhaps more obvious. But how would you frame your own process and discovery in this context?
Eugenia, wanna go first? You want me to go first?
I think I'll just say something that's very short, is that we didn't set out to write a book about the digital environment. We set out to write columns about how the digital interacted with everyday life, like with sports and school and education and work and dating and I don't know, like different realms of everyday life and our, after we had finished like most of this column, say like 4/5 of this, and that's something that united was the environment. So it also took us a while, right? That's just what I wanted to say. I don't know, Pablo, what you think about.
No, I mean, what Eugenia says is right. Just to make it very concrete, Mark, the book was born the very last time that you and I saw each other in Edinburgh.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah.
So the morning that that I arrived to Edinburgh, Eugenia and I traded. I was flying from the States. We traded emails, and I said, "How about we write a monthly column on this?" So she said yes. So I sent an email to the publisher of the news site, the second largest news site in Spanish in the world, and he said yes. And that was there was the morning that you of I then met for the last time at that conference in Edinburgh. So that's how long, and our whole goal was not to write a book. We didn't even know what we wanted to do is to make a lot of the super exciting and amazing research that takes place in our field accessible to Spanish readers. I mean, the site for which we write it's not your high-end site. I mean, it's not the Guardian, the equivalent of the Guardian or the New York Times. It's more like USA Today. So our stories right, will be featured on the homepage next to a story about Madonna and another story about Cristiano Ronaldo. And and we welcome that challenge, and we wanted to write 700 to 1200 words that were accessible. And it was only after Eugenia said a while that we realized there was a theme cutting across. And that's when we proposed the idea of the book to MIT Press. And it's really a book showcasing the work of others. It's not a book showcasing our work. Our work is sort of coming up with this concept and articulation of the concept in relation to the 60 scholars we talked to. Now, on your specific question, I think one reason why it's still, I mean, this is not the mainstream view in the field. I mean, your work, Nick and Andrea's work, primarily also, as you said, Danny Miller, Mirka Marianou, a few other people on the historical front, Fred Turner, sort of have been sort of in recent years bringing this to the foreground. I think it's because of the more traditional scientific method that parcels things out in clear independent variables, clear outcome variables, and everything that doesn't contribute to that sort of Popperian, worldview gets left out, right? And there is a lot of value to that, right? Because you can really get at causal mechanisms. But the problem is when that begins to create a picture of the world that is very, very decoupled from the picture on the ground. And if anything has happened during the past 12 months, for some sectors of society, not everybody has the same access to technology, not everybody can do it, has the same living conditions, etc. But for a portion of society, it has become clear that everything is enmeshed and that we really are on the screen, right? And as you wrote in your book, I mean, we are like fish to water. Media, our relationship to media is like fish to water. So I think that in part, this again runs against the mainstream of how we tend to view the relationship between humans, practices, and artifacts. And we really did not set out to write that. We just wanted to write something that that would capture the overarching themes of the interviews. And there is one more thing that was very important to us and goes back to the issue of Argentina. Usually things flow north to south. This is a book that will go south to north. That is, this started as interviews in Spanish, right? With a fairly large component of folks in Latin America, not the majority, but still. And it will make its way to being published by MIT Press, which is the leading publishers of technology and society. So for us, we fought very hard to make this happen because it's a little bit of a statement that we think that there are significant inequities between regions of the world, and that tends to correlate with some scholars in some parts of the world to look down on the work that is being done in other parts of the world. And we wanted to show that something that starts in Spanish can make its way to preeminent publisher in English. I mean, we fought very, very hard with Eugenia to make that happen, and had a lot of help from MIT Press, but we fought very, very hard.
But maybe I'm going to make another massive leap, but and forgive me if while I'm doing that, because I mean, one thing that really struck me and really inspired me about the book is that what you do is you emphasize how our experience of the digital, of living in a digital environment, is by its very nature an ambivalent experience, right? And you always show that it is, it enslaves us to technology, but it empowers us to do things differently, right? It is emancipatory, but it's also discriminatory, right? AI is not neutral. Data is not some kind of benevolent agent. It has to be closely monitored and policed in order to work and to not exclude as well as include. I mean, and so there's this duality that runs throughout the book that you solve, I would almost say, with agency, with emphasizing agency. Like, we have choices, like, and those choices are ours. They're not machine. They're not the choice of the machine. And in doing so, there's almost a barely contained, if you will, optimism running throughout the book, like things can be better, and this again runs counter to a lot of the mainstream literature, especially in the global north, about technology and society, about the internet, about that it's pretty doomy gloomy. And for a lot of good reasons. I mean, I'm sure we can agree about that. Is the very fact, like what you now emphasize, that this is for you also a way of bringing a perspective from the global south to the global north, and including, of course, references and authors, but also it's very much sort of experiences of people with the digital from the south to the north, that sort of not discredits but adds to that perspective, saying, well, but things are possible actually if you look at it from where we are. And is that a justified analysis that I'm making, or I mean, does the very nature of the fact that you bring perspectives from the south to the north produce a less sort of typical, if you will, dystopian vista on our relationship with the digital?
Okay, you want to go first or you want me to go first?
Let's think.
I mean, it's a complicated question because I had never thought about it that way. I mean, we were working from the south to the north, and we're very convinced of that. But what we also found while writing the chapters of the book is, and we say this in the introduction, that of course there is conflict, but because there is conflict, there is indeterminacy.
Mhm.
And there's where agency plays a part, because sometimes what I read in some I'd say some mainstream work on media is that there is conflict and it would always be resolved for the worst, like expect the worst because the worst will come. And what we found is, of course, sometimes things do go wrong. We're not complete optimists in everything, and reality would deny us if we were. But that conflict sometimes is solved in a way that is positive, and that's our responsibility. So one thing I would say that ties together this working from the south to the north and the indeterminacy that I was talking about is that not only we believe in agency, but we believe that human beings should take charge. Scholars, users, journalists, designers, tech workers. So, because if you don't take charge, it's very easy to say, oh, look, this is a disaster. We can do nothing about this. Let's forbid this or forbid that. So taking charge is kind of saying, no, we have a responsibility in this, each one of us.
Pablo, before you take over, I mean, what comes to mind to me, and this comes from an incredibly uninformed position, so I apologize in advance, but to me this perspective sounds so much like or inspired by work that I know from Latin American scholarship on technology, like even Illich, Tools of Conviviality, about Paulo Freire, although he didn't write directly about technology, but this notion of being part of overarching systems that you can take apart by getting back to the essence of why you want to be that in a certain way and taking responsibility for that and changing it from within. I mean, those to me, that's what I associate with Latin American scholarship on this. But again, this is from a very limited point of view. Does that factor in here at all? Or?
I think it does factor in our training and in our upbringing in Latin America. All Latin Americans or all Latin American social science are familiar with Paulo Freire. I mean, you can't have gone to school in Latin America and not know who Pablo from below and from within. So yes, definitely, it plays a part there, and it also plays a part in, I'd say, working against the odds or have. So I think those are all very Latin American perspectives. In Argentina, I would say lo atamos con alambre, which is like we fix it up with a
barbed wire.
Bit of wire, and we hope it holds.
Duct tape.
Yes, like, yeah, so we'll fix it up. And duct tape, yes, yes, it's a very duct tape, like in our work in this book in particular.
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think so there is there are two currents here. So we are not necessarily unabashedly optimistic, but we are not
No.
dystopian by default. I think what has happened over the past 5 to 10 years, but in particular the most recent 5, is that there's been a cottage industry of technological dystopianism that pays very well. I mean, but you get your book contracts, you get your media columns, etc., etc. But the problem with all of that, in my opinion, politically, is that it is performative. That is, that people do things with those words, and those words do not really match with the entirety of what's going on. And that those narratives are also exculpatory. And because they are exculpatory, they tend also to be disempowering. So to me, it's not only the theoretical. I just want to bring two things that have been very, very empowering to me and very powerful. One is a social movement, there is a personal encounter. Eugenia and I founded together a center for the study of media society in Argentina in 2015. And as part of that work, we do one annual conference a year. And one of the characteristics of the center is that we try to bring together academia and parts of society outside of academia, public sector, private sector, etc. So at our most recent in-person conference, not our most recent conference, in 2019, we had a panel, a main panel at the conference with 2 legislators and a senior policy member of Google, where the 2 legislators talked, were high-ranking members of Congress in the communication and technology policy caucus, essentially, commission at Congress. One of them, who's now the Minister of the Environment for Argentina, is a person who was born in captivity. So his mom was abducted by the military when she was pregnant with him, and was tortured for many months and was kept alive so that she would give birth to him. And subsequently she was killed, and he was appropriated and was raised by a military family. He found out about his identity later in life. He, I believe, is number 77 of the grandchildren of the disappeared that was recovered, started to become a politician. And I might not necessarily agree with his political ideas. Eugenia knows that. As a matter of fact, very much don't agree. But the decision for him to turn so much evil, right, and so much ill into a positive force for change, whether I agree or not, it doesn't matter. It's within democracy, and therefore it is positive. To me, I don't care about the outcome. I care about the process. So that to me is a sign that, we can take matters in our own hand to a certain degree, and we can create. So it was very interesting at the conference. We had a reception at the end of day one, and his panel was the very last one. So he hung out, with us. My older daughter was there with me, and at one point we started talking about privacy issues. And my daughter at one point said, my dad is always worried about somebody stealing his identity. I mean, my social security number, etc., etc. And he looked at my daughter and he said, my identity was stolen, and right, he was appropriated, and all of that. So so that's one. The other thing, and to make it perhaps less romantic and more everyday life, because it's an exceptional case. Argentina recently legalized abortion. It's one of the countries where this has happened recently. Argentina is a country with a very powerful Catholic tradition, And it's the country of the sitting Pope who viscerally opposed, the process. And that process only happened because of the feminist movement. And that process, in part, was highly built on decades-long social activism, and it was highly empowered in part through the use of social media. There were lots of demonstrations. There was a whole movement called Ni Una Menos, not one woman less, against gender-based violence and femicide. That where the activists communicated through social media, because traditional media would pay no attention to them and would silence their claims. And there was a long struggle with many defeats, but in the end, I mean, through the use of technology, but through mostly using technology to enable social activism and to take in charge, they not only managed for the law to be passed, but there is now a Ministry of Gender Equality in Argentina. Even in the Ministry of Economy, there is a secretary or undersecretary of issues of gender and economics and gender equality. So it is possible. It takes an enormous amount of work, and the work is human, it's not technological. But the very same technologies that we claim that oppress us, etc., that can also be used for emancipatory purposes. And this is not an ideological issue. Lots of, when abortion is illegal, poor women die. That's essentially what it is, right? So it's a public health issue, and it's an issue of equality. So seeing all these, struggles and movements, you say, well, okay, yeah, there are, surveillance society, surveillance capitalism, all of that, yes, for sure. But there are countervailing trends, and we need to highlight them. We need to be aware of why they work. And if we want to use that for positive social change, we really need to understand how they work. So the book it doesn't want to settle the tension. It just wants to showcase the tension. That's in part what we want to do.
That's a very beautiful way of putting it. You mentioned in your answer, Pablo, the center that both of you started in 2015, the Meso Center, and last year at Northwestern, you started the Center for Latinx Digital Media, and this those two centers kind of bookend enormous amount of activities that both of you have engaged in over the years in not just collaborating or bringing different voices into conversation, but to also build some kind of institutional structure around this, of bridging gaps, of building bridges between different parts of the world, different intellectual traditions, different language communities, very much so, that for a variety of reasons listen or maybe do not listen to each other. Now, that is extraordinary work in and of itself, but also particularly in the context of how higher education works, that is an extraordinary additional effort that you're making also in your own career to make this work. And I wonder, I understand why you're doing this, and I'm deeply appreciative of it, and I would like to know, what have you learned in doing all of this all these years, launching these centers, organizing annual conventions, including pre-conferences at the annual International Communication Association conference. What have you learned from doing this all those years? What kind of advice would you have on colleagues, both junior and senior, who want to pursue more of because I get with everybody I talk to, and maybe that's my little bubble, and a sense of we need to broaden the conversation. That's pretty clear to everyone. But the next step is, how do you do that? And your work is a clear example of how you do that, but maybe you can tell us a little bit of how it works.
I'm gonna leave to Pablo, who's older and wiser, the advice, but I'm gonna say something about this that's not usually featured in these talks, which is we had tremendous, and we're having tremendous fun. So it's not only about broadening the conversation because it's something you should do. So it's something because it's it's nicer, it's better, it's more enjoyable to do research like this. I'm meeting people through Meso and through the ICA pre-conference scholars from Mexico, from Chile, from Colombia. So what I most value about this is not the work, or not even the results, which are nice, they're good. Oh, scholarship is very important, but also it's so much fun to do work this way, so much more enjoyable than to do work alone. So I'm going to leave the serious part to Pablo, but I wanted to say this: don't do it because it's the right thing to do it because it's fun.
Ah, great
Yeah, so
advice.
so so I think that's the be all and end all. I will defer the wisdom to somebody who's even older than me a few years ago, and it's a great friend and mentor of mine. I was trading emails with Fred Turner, sending him, the second or third annual report, and I told him this is a labor of love,
Mm,
and Fred said it's the only one worth doing.
mm,
So when Eugenia and I started this, I mean, maybe Eugenia had grand ambitions. We just wanted to continue working together within some sort of institutional framework. We had no clue of what it was going to become, no master plan, no roadmap, no nothing.
mm,
We had a couple of guiding ideas, sort of this bringing together industry and policy with academia, etc. But beyond that, we had no idea. And what we found is that there is a lot of joy that occurs when you create spaces for conversations that normally don't happen.
mm,
Um, People are very appreciative, and you become very appreciative. So the content is interesting, but also the vibe
mm,
is different. And Eugenia and I are friends. I go to Argentina, I bring toys to her kids, etc. So and over the years at the center, we have in Argentina developed a number of young scholars who are now doing graduate work overseas, and it's more like a family relationship. And we have WhatsApp groups where we trade pictures of everyday life, cooking, children, dating, whatever. I mean, it's just it has a
mm,
different vibe. um, so if there is one piece of advice, I agree with Eugenia. I said, I mean, we need to do this because it makes us happier.
mm,
And I find after 26 years in the US in sort of very resourceful and prestigious academic institutions, I find the level of resources amazing, but the social environment a little bit sterile
mm,
and very instrumental.
mhm.
And personally, the older I get and the more time I spend, the less appealing it becomes, because
Right.
a life like that is not very much worth, spending a lot of time in. So that's one thing. The other is that what we have found, it wasn't the master plan at all, but what we have found is that yes, there was a space that did not exist before. Same with the center at Northwestern, and in particular with the pre-conferences at ICA. And many of us have these different experiences of being the other at different places. And when you bring all the others together, there is an effect of recognition that is very empowering for people. The center in Argentina is more with sort of Latin America. The one at Northwestern is more Latino USA in relation to Latinos in the diaspora, Latino population in the diaspora. And again, the pre-conference at ICA, we started with one, and we told ICA it was a one-off. And you could sense in the room that people were having this moment of, oh, wow, there are other people who have the same issues that I have.
Mm,
And then Silvio Weisbord not only opened the doors of George Washington University at zero cost, for nothing, just because he's a great guy, essentially, and then had an incredible party at his house an incredible party. It was, we kept ordering food, pizzas, because we're running out of food, we're running out of wine, and until wee hours in the morning. And we said, oh, there is a community, right? And so yeah, I mean, it's not probably for everybody, not, and it probably has different instantiations depending on where you come from. But I think Eugenia has been the wisest here. It's about fun, joy, doing something that somehow makes you feel a little bit more alive. Within academic cultures that then become, in certain countries, sterile and very corporatized. And that is part of the sterilization, I think. They're very, very corporatized. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a great party. But yeah, that's.
Oh, yes, it was.
And knowing Silvio, yeah, that's lovely. Maybe piggybacking onto this and a bit. Also about the idea of having fun. I've noticed earlier about how both of you seem to have fun in poking holes in certain ways of thinking and in certain, especially too established way of thinking. May I interpret some of your recent work also as having a little bit of fun? I mean, the digital environment, like we talked about earlier, in its setup, in its design, is not a traditional academic book. It sounds, and like you said, you've published it first as a series of articles, of columns. So it's a creative way of expressing yourself, of learning new things, of developing an overarching thought for a book that you didn't expect in advance. I know, Pablo, you're about to finish a new book with our mutual friends Barbie Zelizer and Chris Anderson, which is a manifesto, right? For journalism, of what journalism could be. I mean, that of course was a brilliant book by Barbie, and now there's this new manifesto that you're developing. And so again, also not a traditional way of expressing yourself as an academic, as a scholar. And both of you have published in the past, in the recent past, work that takes a stab at something that I guess also is very much part of the community that you just talked about. Is this notion, to some extent also frustrating notion, that if you're a scholar and you're not a native speaker of English, you're not necessarily working at or from a North American or Northwest European university, that you're somehow implicitly or even explicitly held against a different standard. You have to go an extra mile. And it's a struggle that, of course, in the feminist movement, we know all too well. But we see this now on a global scale. Pablo, you've mentioned in this article that I'm now referencing this example of you're submitting a manuscript based on data from Argentina, and say, oh, but we don't do single country studies. Well, I guess except when they're from the US, right? I've had exactly the same experience when I had data from the Netherlands as a PhD student. I could get it published if I set it against data from the US, otherwise no can do. I actually I'm sorry for bringing this up. I once got an email, this was in 1999, from an editor of a big AEJMC related journal, writing me back saying, like, I'm very happy to accept this article finally after I added American data. It's the first article from a non-American scholar and it was very kind, but also incredibly patronizing. So, as if I had some kind of major achievement because I wasn't from the US. But what I would like to ask you is that, in part also from doing interviews in this vlog/podcast series with colleagues like Claudia Mayado, like Saba Bebwawi, Bruce Matsvairo, Herman Wasserman, just the other day, we've been talking a lot about this notion of, diversity, inclusivity, bringing global voices together in our field in media studies. And we all seem to agree that this is truly beginning to happen, right? It's not sort of a token thing anymore at a big conference. There's a growing realization, which is lovely and inspiring, but that begs the question, where do we go from here? right? I mean, if the call towards bringing more voices into the conversation, in broadening the appeal, in not having just white guys from the US talking at as keynotes at conferences, and that's pretty widespread now. Where do we go from here? How do we set the agenda of this particular conversation? And to just give you, it seems that part of that answer is what you just told me, which is to focus on the fun of what happens when you truly do that, things like that. But what would you guys say?
So, okay, you want to go first? Want me to go first?
You go first.
Okay. So I will add, since the political scientist in the conversation has asked me to go first, I will impersonate political science. Well, I think the fun is important, and I think we are at the moment in which there is more voice than what it was before. More voice rights in the language of sort of economics, but we still do not have a lot of decision-making rights. So if you look at the top, the editor of the leading journals, they tend to be all in a handful of countries. Mm-hmm. And because I think national origin of the person is important, but the more important thing is where they are. And what we know about fights, or decades of fights for gender equality, for instance, in politics, is that representation in Congress matters. When there are, right, I mean, there is research that shows that countries that have significant, by law, they say, okay, X number of seats have to be filled by women. Those countries end up enacting laws, right, that end up favoring, right, marginalized or oppressed voices, and that becomes more, it ends up affecting positively other dynamics in society. So I think in terms of practically speaking where to go next, I think now it still is disproportionately. The voices now are being heard, and the most important thing is that it has become legitimate that we need to have more voices. Right. But we need to move from voice rights to decision rights. Not just on issues of South-North, also in terms of gender, also in terms of race and ethnicity. Editors play a very important decision-making role in journals. Some are more activist than others, but they do have decision-making power. And they tend to be placed in a small number of countries, and they tend to be more male than female and more white than other racial and ethnic configurations, etc. And I think I mean, all of them are wonderful people. It's not about who they are individually and their accomplishments and all of that, but I do think that in order to make change more concretely, we need to move to that phase as a field, and in terms of the organizations of the field, journals, learned societies, etc., there needs to be a bit more movement in that space. I don't know, Eugenia, if you want to add anything to that, or what your thoughts are.
Yes, I want to add something. No, I agree with Pablo, and I would also be very careful about not just paying lip service to the idea of diversity. So you have this wonderful person who's a wonderful editor and a wonderful scholar who's all in for diversity and decides, I don't know, to invite you to submit to a journal. And you invite and you submit your paper, and the person is so happy, and he or she names 2 or 3 reviewers, and then 2 out of 3 reviews will say, oh, but you need to contextualize this data. What happens in Argentina that explains this? And you'd never get that kind of review for a paper about data in the US. So right. Either you need to contextualize, and this is something we've already said, but you need to contextualize all your research, not just research from the Netherlands or from Argentina or from Chile or I don't know, from Qatar. You need to contextualize all your research. So you get all this idea that diversity is very important, but then the editor gets these reviews that are very, like, I would say, unfriendly towards works that's not conducted in the first words, so to speak. And he or she never says, I won't accept this review. I'm going to tell this reviewer that he or she should look at this and rephrase it or think about it in a different way. So it's not only about what we say is important, but about what we do when we are in positions of power.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess ultimately it's also beyond decision-making positions and calling upon each other to take responsibility for, being champions of more and a more diverse playing field, is also to create more opportunities for all of us to meet and have a great time, have a good party. I mean, that's ultimately, and that's of course an additional pain of the current situation that we're in this pandemic. But I'm sure we'll pick that up once all the bans are lifted and the vaccines are in place, and we'll meet each other again. Now, dear Eugenia, Pablo, we can talk about this for so much more, but I and I don't even have a schedule, so I could just say we're gonna talk for much more, but I but at the moment my family is banging on the door because I'm supposed to cook tonight. But I just wanted to thank you once more for taking the time and congratulate you with a new book. And Pablo, I know you've got like 2 more books coming out as well. Abundance, a new book, and then the book, of course, with Barbie and Chris. And I know you've sent me work that is in progress, that is about to be published. You've a great special issue that's coming out. I mean, there's so much more that we could have talked about. I think we need to do another one of these. But thanks again, and this is from the bottom of my heart. I dearly wish for us to meet again in person so we can continue the conversation.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the conversation, and absolutely, I'm hoping that either late this year or during 2022, we'll meet again. So thank you very much, Mark.
Cheers. And
thank you very much, Mark. We'll meet again. We'll meet again. I really believe we'll meet again.
We'll meet again.